Database connection methods. So what does that mean? Database connection methods. It's really just another way of saying a data source. And what's a data source? Well, that could be anything from a file, what we would call a flat file, which is really just a text file full of data. It could be an XML file. And it could be as simple as an XML configuration file. It could be complex as a large chunk of XML data from a database stored in an XML file. Or it could even be in-memory data, such as a data set or a data table. As we saw in a previous nugget, we took a look at a data table. So that's really what they mean by database connection methods, different ways of connecting to different sources of data. And I can tell you from experience here, working with database applications and database platforms, you're going to come across a lot of different ways to store data, so we need to know the different ways to access that data. And that's what this nugget is going to really focus on, is just how we can connect to those different kinds of data sources and work with the data inside of them. So with that said, let's jump into the outline for this nugget and take a look at what we're going to be talking about. We're going to start with just a quick data overview here, talk about those different sources that we're going to be working with here: flat files, XML files, and data sets. So just different ways to store and work with data. Then we'll jump into Visual Studio 2010 Express. We'll get our C# on and learn how to work with flat files first. Flat files, just think of them as really just a text file with data in it. So really it's a table stored inside of a text file. But we call it flat because it's not interrelated data in any way. It's just flat data. One table stored inside of there. It could be many, many, many tables flattened out into one table, all joined together with all their columns, and that's why they call them flat files. We're also going to take a look here at how to work with XML data. So I'll show you how we can take an XML file and import it into our database using .NET. And then we'll look here at how to work with in-memory data by working with data sets. We'll pull all of the tables in our reminder database into a data set in memory, relate them all together, and then write some queries to pull the data out and generally work with it here inside of an application. So let's start with a data overview of all these different file formats, types, and sources here before we get into Visual Studio and learn how to work with them in code. And the first one we're going to look at here is just flat files. And flat files is just your standard file-based input and output. And really what these are just standard text files that sit in your system, and they're usually what's called delimiter-based data. And what that means is if we were to take a table or a bunch of tables, because again we're flattening our data out, we're taking interrelational data here that could be span across many tables. We could take a query, pull out all the columns we need by joining all these tables together, and do what's called denormalizing our data. Really, we're denormalizing it to one table, and then we would need to delimit the columns, because again this is all text data. We would need a delimiter so we know where the column ends and the next one begins. And a lot of times, like CSV files, those are just comma delimited files where the rows of data are one line per row inside of our file, and then the delimiter of the column is usually a comma in that case. You can use pipes or really anything. That's why it's called delimited data. You can choose your delimiter when you're doing this kind of stuff, as long as when you're importing your data, or whoever's importing your data knows where your delimiter is and can work with it. So we'll do that when we get into Visual Studio. We'll create a flat file here, just a standard text-based, plain text-based text file that is comma delimited, so we could export all of our reminders data out of our reminders table, and then anybody that has access to the file could then create an import on their system if they wanted to import reminders into their own system. All right, so flat files are just that, file-based input-output. They can be plain text or binary data. And if you are going to work with plain text, you'll use stream writers and stream readers, which we'll use, and I'll show you how to use. And if you're working with binary data, you're going to use binary readers and binary writers. Next, we have XML data. And XML, very popular data format these days because it's human readable. It's easy to read, it's easy to work with, and it's popular not only for data exchange, because as we saw in our web services nugget, it's platform independent, but it's also popular here for settings and configuration files because, again, it's easy to read. You know what the tag describes, you know what the setting is, and then the value is stuffed inside of the tag. So it's real easy to manipulate, edit, and work with XML data for configuration files. It's also easy to represent hierarchical data because we could, create basically what we call parent-child relationships inside of the data, nested data within here. And to work with XML data here, we'll use XML readers and XML writers. So we'll take a look at how to take an XML file and import it into our reminder database from a file on disk. So we'll take all the data out of there, and we'll reuse our stored procedures that we built in a previous nugget to put the data inside of our database. So very useful to use this stuff in case someone out there created an export of reminders in XML, and we could pick it up and put it into the database for them, so they don't have to necessarily use our interface to input data into our database. And finally here, we'll look at data sets, how we can create and work with in-memory data inside of our application. So we'll take a look at how we'll pull back all three of the tables we built, we'll relate them together in memory, and then I'll show you how to navigate the relationships by creating queries, and we'll just output all the data from our database, reminder data, user data, and all that to a console window so we can see it live in action here. So you fill data sets from queries, and then we're going to, again, use that data locally inside of an application. And a data set is above a data table. I know we worked with data tables up to this point. If you've watched the other nuggets in the series, a data table, again, just a virtual representation of a table inside of memory. A data set is just a layer above that. It hosts lots of data tables, and then we can use data relations to work them to link them together, and then we can use those relationships to navigate the parent-child rows within these tables, which is exactly what we'll do here when we get into Visual Studio. So there's a quick data overview. Again, that's what you'll be working with quite a bit if you're going to be working with data, whether it's inside of your application or outside of your application. Flat files and XML data are the popular ones for storing data outside of the application. Data sets for working with data inside of the application. So let's head over to Nugget Lab. I'll minimize the whiteboard, fire up Nugget Lab, and as soon as this opens up here, let's head down to the Start button, up to Visual C# 2010 Express Edition. And I created a project. We already got a project going here called RDBMS_connections. We'll open this up. This is just a console application I threw together here. Not much to it, really. And one thing I do want to mention is I brought in our DB Engine class and our Reminder class from a previous nugget. And what I did here in our Reminder class is pretty much nothing. Nothing at all. It's really just our standard Reminder class here that we've been working with up to this point. I don't have email address in here, but that's not going to be a big deal because I'll show you why when we get there. DB Engine, I did add one thing here. I added one routine called the Get Reminder dataset. So when we start working with datasets, I'll come in and show you what this is all about here. But the main part of our code that I want to show you here is in our console application. I have three routines in here: export flat file, import XML file, and then just dataset data. So I want to show you how we can export data out of our database into a flat file. And in a real world scenario, we could maybe push that data up to an FTP server somewhere, email that file to somebody. I mean, there's a lot of things we could do with the file once it's outside. Once we create this data and have it outside of the database, we could give it to anybody that needs to use it. We'll import an XML file. So we'll kind of do the opposite here. We'll take the data that's already stored on the hard drive and put it into our database. Again, another way that in the real world, that as long as people have our schema, which just describes how the data is formatted, how the XML data is formatted, which is really easy to do with XML, as long as they know how to format the data so it fits inside of our import and inside of our tables, they could create these files all day long, upload them, and we could have processes here that take that file and pipe it into our database. So I'll show you both ways of doing it. Take data out of the database, put data into the database, both using the different file formats, and then just generally here working with data sets and in-memory data. So just to look at our folder over here that I didn't show you, we have a data directory. And so what we're going to do is when we're working with an export to flat file, we're actually going to export our flat file to the hard drive in this directory. So we'll just be able to show all files here, and we'll be able to see the file in here and look at it rather than navigating through the hard drive here. And then our import XML file will actually import this file in. So we just got a data directory for working with and storing our files, so we have easy access to them from within Visual Studio. So first things first here, let's look at exporting data using a flat file. All right, so we're going to take data out of our database, pipe it into this file using a stream writer. All right, so the first thing you need to do if you're going to work with flat files or text files or anything that has to do with input and output onto your file system is you need to bring in the using system.io. The system.io namespace brings in the stream readers and the stream writers. So the first thing I do here is just get our connection going. So we got our DB engine set up right up here. And then we create a list of reminders using what we already built in a previous nugget called dbe.getReminders. This is going to simply just give us a list of reminders, reminder objects filled with data from the database. All right, and then we're going to use the stream writer here. And I don't know if I showed you the using statement. I don't believe I have showed you the using statement up to this point. This is just a handy statement that you can use that will manage the connection for us. So this will open it when it needs it and close it when it doesn't need it. So basically, this bracket right here, when it hits this one, it's going to open it. Well, actually, in the using statement is when it opens it. And then at the end here is when it closes. So you don't have to manage opening, closing, and the resource associated with that connection. It all does it for you. So the using statement, very easy. We just say using, and then inside of parentheses, the object that we're going to use, followed by the name that we're going to reference it by, equals a new stream writer. And this is just a fancy way here of navigating the file structure of our project. We're going up 2 levels to data, because when you run this application, we're actually, and I'm going to hit the show all files button here, we're actually running, the exe is stored inside of our debug directory here. So if we were to just put in /data/reminders.txt, it would get planted inside of the debug directory. So by doing this, we're going up to the bin directory, doing it one more time, we're going up to our project directory that we're at, and then specifying the data directory. That's how it's going to pipe this text file, our flat file here, reminders.txt, into our data directory. So getting that stream writer instantiated here just requires basically where we're going to put it, and so that's what we did with our path here. Now we're just going to loop through our reminders, row by row, or I should say reminder by reminder inside of our list here, and then just create a string.format here. We're just going to create one big string object here, a string variable. We're going to do a string.format, and then each of our columns separated by a comma. There's our delimiter there. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Here's 0, reminder ID, 1, name, 2, due date, 3, alert time, 4, notes, 5 is complete, and 6 is enabled. All right, so that'll create one big honking string per row. So this will be our row here. And then we just do an sw.writeLine, pass in a reminder row, and that'll write it out to the text file, line by line. That's it. Not a lot of code there to export data to a flat file. Very easy, very straightforward. And again, here, if you want to read data from a flat file or a text file, you just do the opposite, and you use a stream reader and a read line. So very simple to use this input-output stuff. Now let's head up to the top here. Let's uncomment export flat file routine out of our main routine here, and let's just run this. If we run it, what should happen here is as long as no errors were generated, which they weren't, that means everything ran successfully, and we can find out here by showing all files. Hey, and there it is, reminders.txt in our data directory. So if we right-click, choose include in project, just undo show all files there, and if we open it, there is all the reminders right out of our database. And I haven't touched our database at all. In fact, just to show you here, if we go into Database Explorer, expand tables, right-click on our reminders, and show table data, there's all of our reminders, 1, 3, and 4, all the data in there, and that's exactly what we just took out of the database and put inside of this file, comma delimited. All right, so that's how you can work with flat files, and really you're in full control of how that file is formatted here, just by simply creating a loop, do a string.format, and then you can use whatever you want for your delimiter. So very easy to work with flat files. Now let's move on to XML data. I'm going to collapse export flat file routine. Let's expand the import XML file routine, and I'm going to open up our reminders.xml file here. So here we go. We have some reminder tags here that encapsulate all of our reminder data. So we have 2 reminders inside of our XML file here. Our first reminder is it's going to be a brand new reminder. And here's what's cool about this, is we're actually reusing the functionality that we built in a previous nugget within our DB-Engine class. So if you remember, inside of our save reminder routine, we had this logic here that says if the reminder equals 0, it's going to be a brand new reminder. And if it isn't, we're going to update an existing reminder to provide what we call upsert functionality. Update if it exists, insert if it's brand new. So we're actually reusing that functionality through the data, which is really cool, because here we're just not adding a reminder ID up here, and down here we do have a reminder ID, and these are attributes, by the way. They're considered attributes when there's data inside of a tag like this. So because this has a reminder ID, our record inside of our database should get updated, and this one should be inserted. Alright, so we're going to actually update our first one. Watch Nuggets is the name of this reminder. And I took the exclamation point off, and then I added a brand new note in here saying that we should make this a recurring reminder feature, because this should happen every day, right? Why should we need to come in and re-enable this every morning? So this will be a brand new one up here. CBG Nuggets question of the week. Win some swag. Here's the time. Here's the alert time. All that good stuff. So we've got 2 reminders in here. Let's take a look at our XML data, or XML code, I should say. And we start with a using statement, this time using an XML reader. And here we do an XML reader.create, passing in the file name that points to our reminders.xml file inside of our data directory. So this will hook an XML reader into this file. And how XML readers work is it traverses it node by node. That's why we need a while loop. And every time we call the read statement, it's going to traverse another node. And what's a node? Well, in XML data, everything's a node. So this element is a node. This element's a node. The name begin element here is a node. Then the data, the actual data itself, the value, that's a node. And then the end tag is a node. So every time we call read, it's going to push the node forward one. And you're going to see how this works here, because once we start our loop, the first thing we're going to do is make sure that we're at a start element. And then we create this huge switch statement that is going to basically extract every value out of every element, except for the reminder. We're going to see if it has attributes. If it has an attribute, we need to pull the attribute out by calling the get attribute method on the actual reader itself. But everything else here, what we do, all these elements, we actually have to call the read method again to traverse the node to the value node. That's when we can extract the value out, put it inside of the property of our class, and we do that for every single element then within our file. So once it hits the element, we call read, it pushes that over to the value, we pull the value out, and then break out of the switch statement and go to the next one. So it's just basically going to loop through everything, pulling the values out, and filling up our class with the values. All right, so that's all that's doing until we get to the very end, because we need to know when we're at the end of a reminder, so we can take our class and send it over to our save reminder routine, which will then use the store procedures to put it into the database. So that's all we're doing, is we're analyzing the name to see if we're at the reminder node again, and if the node type is an end element. So that'll signal to us that we're here, we're at the end, we're ready to submit this class because it's filled up with data to the database. So we just instantiate our DB engine object, we call save reminder, passing in the reminder, and then we reset our reminder class so it's brand new, because again, we have multiple reminders in here, it's going to get refilled with data again. So that's why we reset it down here when we're at the end of the reminder. Alright, so this should work. The first thing I want to do here is just scroll up to the top, recomment export flat file, uncomment import XML file, and then I also just want to show you, if we expand our Database Explorer, open our reminders table to show the table data, this is what we currently have. We just have 3 reminders in there, just as we left it before. So what this should do when we run it is it should take the exclamation point off, we should get some new notes, and then we should get a brand new reminder in here as well. So I'm going to leave this table open, head back over to our program, let's just scroll down into our XML area here. As long as we don't get any errors, everything should succeed just fine. So let's hit run. Hey, no errors, alright? So now we can head over to our table, and this doesn't refresh automatically, so we have to hit the execute button. Hey, there it is, look at that. So our exclamation point's gone, we've got our new value here in notes, and then we've also got our new reminder in here, the CBT Nuggets question of the week. So very cool, it worked, and that's how you can work with XML data to import it using XML writers and XML readers. Actually, in our case, an XML reader, but again, it's just as easy to use an XML writer. You're just kind of going in reverse, and you're writing it out node by node, nodes and values. All right, so that's XML data. Let's move on and take a look here at how to work with dataset data. And the first thing I want to show you here with dataset data is what I did inside of our DB engine class. This is where all the work is really for pulling the data out, because I added this routine here called getReminderDataset, which is going to return a data set back into our console application that we're going to work with to pull the data out and display it to the user. What we're doing inside of our database engine class, however, is we're going to run 3 separate queries. And let me just close out of our table here. All we're doing is we're going to write a query for each table. All right, so we're just going to pull these tables in as they are, unrelated, into our data set, and then using code, we're going to do it ourselves here. So our first data adapter is going to run select star from reminders, our second one's going to select star from users, and our third one's going to get select star from reminders to users. So we've got 3 data adapters, we create one data set, and then we call the fill method on each data adapter, passing in the data set, and then what we want the name of the data table inside of there to be. So we're just creating 3 virtual tables inside of our data set. And then here's the part where we relate them together. We create relationships between the columns in the tables. That way the client application can traverse these relationships to pull out the records that are related. So the first relationship we add here is a reminder relationship. We call it reminders. We add it between the tables reminders and reminders to user, both on the reminder ID column. And then the second one we add is called users, and we add this between the users table and the reminders to users table on user ID. So if you want to visualize this, here's what we're doing. Our first relationship is going to be between our reminders table and our reminders to user table on the reminder ID. And this is where that intermediate table comes in handy. And our second one's going to be users and reminders to users between our user ID. So we're connecting these two tables using our intermediate table here. And how this works is this is going to actually be the child table to this parent table and the child table to this parent table. And that's going to become important when it comes time to traverse these relationships to pull the data out. So finally, what this method does is just return that data set to the client application. So if we go back into our program, again, the first thing we do is just instantiate a DB-Engine object, and then we create our own data set to work with here. And instead of instantiating it to a new data set, we just call our getReminderDataSet method out of our DB-Engine class. So that'll throw that data set into this data set, and now comes time to work with the tables inside of here. So what we're going to do is we're going to output to the console window a list of reminders and the email addresses tied to that reminder. And this is going under the assumption here that we have multiple users tied to a reminder. And what I did, just to show you, if we go into our reminders to users, actually first let me show you our users table. If we show the table data for our users here, you can see I added John and Jane as well as myself. So we have 3 users with 3 email addresses in here. And back in our Database Explorer, if we go into our reminders to users and show the table data, we've got 3 users tied to the first reminder, all 3 of us. So we should get each reminder and then all the email addresses underneath it. And how we're going to grab those email addresses is by traversing the relationship for the reminder. So if we close out of these and go back into the code here, the first thing we're going to do is just create a for each loop that goes through our reminders table. So that's what we want to do. We want to grab the reminders first, and then we're going to traverse the relationship to grab the emails for the reminder. So that's all we're doing is creating a data row here called drReminder and looping through the dataset.tables. And the first table we're going to go through here is the reminders table. So the next thing we do then is just simply write some stuff out to the console window here. We write the name of the reminder followed by, in parentheses, the ID of the reminder. And you can see here it is here. So drReminder name.toString, and then we just put the reminder ID. So that way we see what reminder we're working with, and we can see the ID for reference. Then we just output the static text here, users, because underneath this we're going to display the users and their email addresses. And here's the first traversal of a relationship. Now, this getChildRows method, what it does is it takes the name of a relationship, and we're passing in the name of our relationship reminders, because if you remember in our DB-Engine, the first relationship we added we called reminders, and we probably could have named it something a little more, a little better than reminders since we have a reminders table. But just know that's the name of the relationship for our reminders here. So again, getChildRows here actually returns an array of data rows. That's why we have an array declared here, and we call this drRTUs, because this is going to be the reminder to users table. Again, the child rows of the reminder table is actually our intermediate table. So that's what we're doing. And then we're going to loop through our intermediate table row by row, which is actually these data rows here, this array here, row by row. And then we're going to create another array here, only this is going to go to our users table by getting the parent rows of our other relationship that we created called users, this one. Because again, users is a parent to our intermediate table here, our reminders to users table. So that's all we're doing there. We're getting our users, and then again we're going to do another loop here that goes through all the users, and then it's just going to output the username and their email address with a tab underneath, so it looks like, you know, it's hierarchical data underneath the users. And that's it. It'll write a line, and then it'll write a line here to separate all our reminders by a line, and finally it'll give us a read. So let's test this out. Let's see how this works. Let's head back up here again, comment out our old one, uncomment our dataset data, and let's hit execute here. So here's how it works. First it hits the reminder table, and it pulls out the reminder. There's our ID watch nuggets, and then it's going to go through all the users, traversing again that relationship through our intermediate table to pull out username followed by their email address. So again, I only tied 3 users to our first reminder there, and the other ones just we don't have any users to these yet. We didn't tie it in here, and you can see this is our brand new one. It even came in, but it doesn't have any users to it. But our other one, take out the garbage, is assigned to me, of course, and so that's how that works. So it's pretty easy once you get the hang of this stuff to, you know, it's really just, it looks complicated and complex at first, but it's really just once you understand relationships and how they work between tables and interrelated data, it's just a matter of understanding what the parent is, what the child is, and then writing a few loops to navigate those relationships and pull the data out. Alright, so in the CBT Nugget, we took a look at database connection methods. We started off with just a look at some of the different types of data sources you'll be working with here in the programming and database world, such as flat files, XML files, and dataset objects, in-memory dataset objects. Kind of saw where they all fit in the big picture here. And then we got into working with each one of them. Created and worked with flat files to create an export, worked with XML files to create an import, and then worked with datasets to bring data from a database in and manipulate and work with it in memory. I hope this has been informative for you, and I wish you the very best of luck in 98-361 Software Development Fundamentals.